Okay, let me switch gears with you. In your estimation, where are we at with this ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia? Because it seemed like for a while the United States felt like this was heading towards a ceasefire. Then Ukraine launches missiles deep into Russia. Then, oh, we apologize. It looks like the ceasefire's back on. Then Russia attacks a Ukraine city on Palm Sunday. Where do you think we're at?
Well, first of all, everyone needs to go back and look at the preconditions for any sort of peace agreement that the Russians have stipulated for months and months and months. They're very straightforward: denazification, neutralization, a legitimate leadership in Kiev, and ultimately neutrality for Ukraine. Now, there is no legitimate government today in Kiev. This is a criminal regime that canceled elections, that's put itself permanently into power, and is kept there by a vicious, corrupt, and dangerous secret police establishment. If you simply listen to what this Ukrainian regime says and about the Russians and then apply it to the Ukrainians, then you get the truth. You're dealing with a regime that has shut down all political opposition parties. You're dealing with a regime that has taken direct action against churches, particularly the Orthodox Christian Church. They've set up an attempt to build a phony church that is obedient to them and is divorced from Russia, when in reality that's never been fully sanctioned or recognized anywhere. But again, people have been paid off and certain things have happened. I think the problem we're up against is that no one really listens to the Russians. And then we walk in and say, well, let's have a ceasefire. The Russians say, to what purpose? And we say, well, to stop the killing. Well, as far as they're concerned, a ceasefire, based on their experience, simply presents an opportunity to the Ukrainians to rapidly rebuild, reconstitute, and renew the fight. In the meantime, we continue to supply hundreds of millions, billions of dollars worth of equipment and ammunition and cash to the Ukrainians, even though it's widely admitted that everything we give them, about 50% of it is either resold on the black market or disappears into the hole of corruption. But we continue to send money there, which really raises some tough questions about who the hell is sitting in Congress and insisting on this. I don't think there's any chance for us to have much impact anymore. And the reason I say that is very simply because President Trump walked in, thought he was going to wave his hand, peace would break out, and he would be viewed widely as this great purveyor of goodness and stability. Well, that's not the way it works. You have to sit down and you have to listen to what both sides are saying, but most important to the Russians. Now, has President Trump achieved anything that's good with the Russians thus far? I would say yes. I think that we've made a lot of progress towards normalization of our relations with the Russians, particularly in business and commerce. And I think that's a very good thing. It could still be destroyed by people in Washington who have a permanent interest in hostility to Russia. But as far as the Ukraine business is concerned, no. I think the Russians have discovered that we're not going to listen to them. We're not going to take their legitimate security interests seriously. So they're going to press ahead until this beast is dead that lives in Kiev. And it's getting closer every day. I think by the time they're through, you'll have the Dnieper River as a border between eastern Ukraine under Russia and western Ukraine that will be neutral. And all the talk about the British or the French or someone else going into western Ukraine with troops is sheer unadulterated nonsense, because none of the Europeans can do anything without us. They have essentially neutered themselves militarily over the years by not just by spending too little money, but creating the wrong force for national defense. They've been focused on little interventions in Africa and the Middle East, places like this where they can play colonial master again, the British, the French, to a lesser extent, the Dutch, the Belgians. So they have no real forces to send in. They don't have access to our command control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance that's space-based or even terrestrially based. In other words, they can't fight a real war against anybody right now. A friend of mine in the French army said, Doug, the only thing the French army is organized to do right now is go on safari in Africa. So I think the Russians will fight this to the bitter end. They're not in any great hurry. They moved very slowly because they don't want to take casualties unnecessarily. So if they run into a hard point of resistance, they'll back up. They'll carefully isolate it, establish who's in it, give these people a chance to surrender. And if they don't, they'll annihilate them with overwhelming, accurate, devastating firepower. Then they'll move through and go on to the next objective. That's where they're doing business, and the Ukrainians have no chance whatsoever against them because they are unable to do the things tactically or operationally that the Russians are doing.
Yeah, I'm not going to take time to look it up, but remember in Congress when all the Democrats were waving the Ukraine flag, they had just voted against something that would help the American people, but then they were waving their Ukraine flags. Do you think Trump is afraid to cut off money and weapons to Ukraine because it might trigger an impeachment? Or I don't know. I feel like Zelensky is kind of leading him around by the nose.
Well, Zelensky is part of a three-legged stool. You have Zelensky in Kiev, you have Netanyahu in Israel, and then you have New York City and Washington, the powerful moneyed elites that want war with Russia, and they want war in the Middle East against whomever the Israelis don't like. That's a very powerful triangle politically for President Trump. There's only one way to deal with this sort of thing. It's like you remember as a child, you were cut or something, and your mother took the bandage and ripped it off. Well, he refuses to rip it off. He's trying to pull it up carefully, step by step. That just prolongs the agony. And somebody said, well, how do you stop Netanyahu? Well, you stop sending him weapons and arms and money. That's very simple. He's through if you can't get access to that. He could do nothing without us. Well, then how do you stop Zelensky? You stop aid, money, cash, equipment. He can do nothing without us. I mean, that's the answer is that simple. But right now, we're unwilling to do either, which presents us with the real possibility that despite good intentions, and I do not doubt President Trump's intentions. I know him, not as well as some other people, but I got a chance to appreciate him up at close range, and I know he's very sincere, and I know he doesn't want war. But that's not enough.
Yeah, it's like he can't quite untangle himself. And yet, Steve Witkoff was over negotiating with Russia, tends to say, Russia wants to end this, but, they want certain parameters met. And but again, I see Zelensky as the one that wants to keep this thing going. You had once said something to the effect on my show that Russia has been made into this evil boogeyman in order for the military-industrial complex to justify this large military spending in America. Is that also true of Europe? Did they make Russia this big, bad, evil boogeyman in order to justify their spending on military stuff?
I think in Europe, it's a little more complex. I think you're dealing with this globalist ruling class. What are the globalist objectives? They want regional or world government. They want to eliminate borders. They want to destroy national identity. They want to homogenize Europe into an amorphous mass of people who are obedient to whatever they want them to do. That's the simplest explanation I can come up with. It's failed. The Europeans don't want that any more than we do. They're fed up. They're disgusted. And I think now that the lies are beginning to see daylight, people are beginning to figure out that they have been systematically lied to about a whole range of things, not the least of which is about Russia. The elites say this is our last chance. If we can't convince people that Russia is an enemy and that Russia is the cause of our misfortunes, the populations will eventually turn to us and say, you bankrupted us. You destroyed our economies. You embraced all these conditions for Russian cooperation that were never necessary. Russia is not interested in invading us. Russia wants to do business with us. Now, once that becomes increasingly clear, people like Starmer and Macron and this new man Merz in Berlin, who is just another version of Merkel, only in male clothing, these people are going to be gone. They'll be gone quickly. And that's what they're afraid of.